Welcome back. I'm in the City of Mesa's fire alarm room where all 911 calls are taken and sorted. Here around me, you'll see I have fire dispatchers who will be the ones who will be answering that call should you have or need help during this monsoon season. Joining me to discuss how this process works is my friend here, Captain Bob Luby. Bob, good to see you.
Hey, Forrest, good to see you too.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to join us here.
Absolutely.
Now explain to us, how does this process work once that 911 call is put out during these monsoon seasons?
Well, the 911 system during the monsoon season as well as just on a normal day like today is very similar. You'll initiate a call to 911 and a call taker will answer that call, and then they'll make a determination, is it appropriate for us to send the police department, the fire department, or both? And then the call taker will bump that call over to our dispatch center, and then our dispatchers will dispatch the closest unit. But during the monsoon season, the calls just increase exponentially. As a matter of fact, about 2 weeks ago, we had 60 calls for service in a 2-hour period, which is probably 3 times more calls than we normally would. But those numbers are a little misleading because the types of calls were significantly more critical than what we see on our normal day-to-day operations. So they were much more resource intensive than like our calls that we're running right now.
Now describe to us what a typical monsoon season call consists of.
Well, we see wind damage related incidents, so we see power pole lines down, we see refuse in the roadway, power outages because the power lines are down. We also see an increase in swift water incidents because we've got so much water running through our roadways. Now, a swift water incident is significantly more resource intensive than, for example, a med call where we have one person that's injured, we'll send an ALS unit and an ambulance. A swift water incident requires significant numbers of resources because we need to have people addressing the incident, we need to have people upriver, downriver, and then one of the quickest ways, although not the way that we resolve every swift water incident, but a quick way to resolve a swift water incident is with the use of a helicopter, which is probably not an option during the monsoon season because of the weather. We also see a dramatic increase in respiratory related incidents because of the dust.
Earlier this month we experienced some effects of these monsoons here, and you noticed a huge increase in these calls as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we saw a dramatic increase in calls related to lines down and power outages. And something that I'd like to talk about reference lines down is how dangerous lines down are. And if you look at a line, it's impossible to determine if it's energized or not. And if the line is de-energized, it can become re-energized at any time. That's the way the power grid works. So think about it as you've got a line down, as it leads back to the power pole, the entire circumference around that power pole is where the line could jump to. So that entire area is a hazard area. We talked about having fire units respond to those. What we do is we isolate the area and keep people out, but we're dependent on the power company to come and secure the line and secure the power. So think about that very large area that we're trying to secure. That requires a great deal of fire and police department resources.
Wow. So now that we know that isn't typical, you're still dealing with business as usual. So how does this impact work here? Because then now you've got these calls that are coming in. We've got a regular day-to-day call volume. How do you sort out what's the priority call and how do you sort these in?
Well, you said business as usual. Obviously, our normal calls continue to come in during the monsoon season. So for example, if a call were to come in right now, and let's say it was related to an isolated extremity injury, somebody injured their ankle, and we take a look at that call, we know it's not life-threatening, but it's still something that we're going to respond to and we're going to send out personnel. Right now we probably have a fire truck available. Within a couple of minutes away, we'll dispatch them and they'll respond to serve the community. But during monsoon season, we take a look at that incident and there's so many other calls that have come in that are immediately life-threatening. For example, lightning strikes to houses or to palm trees, people with respiratory problems. What we do is we triage our calls and then we'll take that isolated ankle injury and we'll have to bump it to the bottom of the list. And the problem is, as we get closer and closer to dispatching that ankle-related call, we have other emergent calls come in, so we may not be able to get to that non-emergent call until the monsoon starts to wind down and our normal resource levels come back up.
Well, I can't imagine the number of resources that come into play into this too, because you were talking about power lines, flooding. I imagine there's issues with phones and that sort of thing. How does it work with regard to other resources dealing with perhaps SRP or city utilities and the such?
Well, we use, we coordinate our response with all sorts of internal municipal resources as well as other agencies. As you can imagine, the power companies are extremely busy during during a monsoon season. And what we do is we coordinate with them and let them know which incident we believe they need to come out to on a first serve basis. For example, on our most recent monsoon, we had power lines down on a house. It was energized with people trapped inside. Obviously, we wanted to have the power company respond to that incident prior to some other ones where people were not in immediate danger. In addition to that, we coordinate with the police department, and we also coordinate with other municipal services to clear the roadway.
Now, we're talking about these emergencies and such, and sometimes it's almost next to impossible to really guess what's going to come up. So when we talk about these things, that's just power going out and such, what do we do, or what can we do to talk to the public about empowering yourselves to prepare for these type of emergencies?
Well, think about what are the things that you do on a daily basis that require power, and what component of that might be emergent. In particular, if you have some medical need and you have medical equipment that is power driven, what is your backup plan for dealing with that? We have had instances where we've had huge power outages and we've set up emergency evacuation shelters, but people tend to be much more comfortable at home just waiting for us to bring the power grid back up. Particularly, some people have oxygen equipment that's power driven and they don't have a redundant system that's not, that doesn't require electricity. So we obviously talk about that as far as power, but take a look at what are my needs and what can I do to self-sustain, and that's probably going to answer your question most effectively. In addition, we talk about having a contact list. Think about which neighbors might be a resource, how are you going to get in contact with family members, and what can you do in your community to support yourself if our system is overwhelmed. And something else to consider is our communication system becomes overwhelmed when there's a whole bunch of phone calls going on. If you can send a text message to family members, that's a much smaller piece of information, and it's a lot more likely to get through if communication networks are saturated.
All right, now speaking of preparedness, I see you brought something along here for us to look at.
Well, this is a commercially available emergency preparedness kit. And essentially the most important components is we've got this flashlight. It's a wind-up flashlight. We've got drinking water, and then we've also got some food available in the kit. But just because this is commercially available, it doesn't mean that you can't put these things together on your own and have them in a backpack. Another thing is there's this emergency family preparedness guide, which talks about some information that may help prepare you for an emergency. A lot of this information is available online. I'm sure you're going to talk about that at the end of the segment, and this would be a good place to keep some of those emergency contact numbers. In addition to that, if you have any medication needs, this would be a good place to have prescriptions so that you could possibly fill them out of state or think about having some redundancy with your medications.
All right, well, a lot of this looks awfully expensive too. I mean, what kind of price tag are we looking at for some of the basics to get me started?
Well, again, the main thing is a flashlight, food, and water. You can put a kit like that in a backpack together for probably $10, and you're going to be significantly better prepared than if you didn't have that equipment.
All right. Now, Bob, if you could sum it all up, what's the #1 message you'd want our viewers to walk away with?
Well, heed signage if you come to a flooded roadway. If you take a look at a couple inches of water, you're thinking, I can probably make it through that. But as the water gets brought down from a large canal into the small amount of clearance on the roadway, there's a whole lot of power pushing, and it easily will sweep a vehicle off the roadway. So don't enter flooded roadways, particularly if you see warning signs. If you're washed off of the roadway, stay in your vehicle. That's much safer than trying to get out of your vehicle. Because our waters raise so quickly, they're likely to drop down quickly also, so definitely staying in your vehicle is the best choice as opposed to getting out of the vehicle. And remember, if you make it across that roadway, you may get to another roadway that's even more flooded upriver or down the road a little bit further, so just don't even try and cross those roadways. Another thing that I want to talk about is the value of our regional response system. This is a regional dispatch center. We dispatch for essentially the East Valley, but there is a regional response concept. So essentially what happens is if somebody calls 911 and we're going to dispatch a fire resource, we dispatch the closest fire resource regardless of jurisdictional boundary at all times. And that gets you the most appropriate resource right away. And it helps us on a big incident because we can pull in resources from other cities, and also if they are overwhelmed by their call needs, we go and back them up. So it serves the citizens best every day, but in particular on when we have major calls for resources like during the monsoon season, our regional response system is fantastic.
That's great. Well, Bob, thank you very much. That is excellent insight for our viewers there. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Forrest.
If you'd like more information on how you can prepare your own emergency preparedness kit, or at least have items that you can put in your kit, go to mesaz.gov/fire. Thank you for joining us in this edition of What's on Fire. We'll see you next time.